You all so tuned in to the opening line there, which was well, which is short for welcome to the March 2015 Bicycle Lunch and Learn put on by the Portland Bureau of Transportation and Team of Forsberg with the Active Transportation Division. Some of our products are over on the table there. Feel free to grab a bike walk map or information about Portland road etiquette. Before I jump into what you're really here for, I just have to do two quick messages from our sponsor. One is that May 10th is Mother's Day, which is a great day to remember. And it's especially a great day to remember because it is the first Sunday Parkways of the 2015 season. We'll be in East Portland, and feel free to volunteer. We can always use more help being a superhero at an intersection. Need more information, portlandsundayparkways.org. And secondly, if you did not get a personalized invitation to today's presentation, there are sign-in sheets over there. Just put down your email address. We don't spam you, just 1 or 2 emails a month to let you know what the presentations are that are coming up, and maybe to let you know where to find a recording of the presentation if you missed one. So, thank you for your patience with that. Now I'm extremely excited to introduce today's panel for what we're calling Portland Before Platinum. And I know many people thought that that title referred to what Portland was like before I started coloring my hair. But some of you might recognize the fact that Portland was recognized as a platinum level bicycle friendly community a few years back. And it wasn't always thus. And the reason we got there was because of the efforts of lots of people, and I'm very excited to hear the stories of the 4 women here today who were very big parts of that. So, let me introduce to you, and because I suffer from CRS, I'm going to be reading. We have Anndy Wiselogel, Barb Grover, Jessica Roberts and Mia Birk. I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves as they wish, but we're going to go in chronological order of when our speakers arrived to talk about their stories. I've asked them to give just a little brief kind of understanding of what was Portland like when each arrived, and then we'll have questions. So please, welcome our panel.
Hi everybody, thanks. I'm really glad to be here. My name is Anndy Wiselogle. And when I was 20 years old, I decided that I was going to dedicate my life to women's issues, women's liberation. And then when I was 25 years old, I decided I was going to dedicate my life to bicycling. So it's an honor to be in this panel here. And that time was in Portland. So I'll be talking about the period from the mid-70s through the 1980s, which is when I was active with bicycling. And I'm going to talk about 2 things, 2 areas I was involved in: the Bicycle Repair Collective and the Salmon Street Bike Route. But first, let me give a little background about what was happening with bicycling in the 1970s. Not much. You could get, bikes were 10 speeds. You could get a Racemaker touring bike. That's all mountain bikes came much later. There was no bike parking. I can remember, there were no facilities. There was no bike parking. I can remember I would look, and I was commuting my bike at the time, so I would lock my bike to the railing. And the store proprietor would come out and say, "Don't park here, you're going to scratch the railing." So that kind of stuff went on. No on-street facilities, oh my gosh. Now, actually, the Oregon law with 1% of gas tax going to bicycling, that had passed maybe a few years before. So there were 2 bike routes that I knew of. One was the Ho Chi Minh, anybody here who's old enough to nod? The Ho Chi Minh Trail, which went from nowhere in Portland State to nowhere else on the sidewalks. And the other was the bike path that's in Shampooey Park, which is still there.
Yeah.
So the picture is, bikes are superfluous and they're at best for kids. Okay? That's sort of the picture. So I've been working in a regular bike shop for a couple of years, and a friend of mine had been repairing bikes out of his house for, well, I don't know how long. And he said to me one day, "Andy, what do you think of the idea of setting up a bike repair shop and we'll run it collectively?" Because that's what we did in the 70s. So we talked a little, thought a little, and with his collection of tools and my $40 for the first month's rent, we opened the bicycle repair collective. I kept my day job. I was not trying to make a living from the court. God, this meager. The Bike Repair Collective. Oh, well, let me say one other thing. We said it, I always come from the belief of kind of an each one teach one. If I can learn something, you can learn something. So why not provide bike space where people can learn to repair their own bikes? We'll provide tools, we'll provide stands, we'll let them do that. So we did that, but we charge for members to teach our space. But I realize that's very unique for a bike shop that makes its living from repairing bikes to teach other people, here's what we do. But it was a great success, and supported 2 or 3 people full-time for, right, just folded a couple of years ago, so it was a 38-year history, something like that. So through that, there was a need for bike rides, so we would offer evening bike rides. The Parks and Rec tapped me to say, would you lead tours to the bike tours on the San Juan Islands? What, I provide my bike? Yeah, okay. So we started doing rides, and there was yet another energy crisis during the President Carter's era. I and 2 other women got a grant to encourage bicycle commuting. So with that, we could do clinics and help people learn how to ride in traffic, how to do traffic signals, how to plan good bike routes. We spoke to employee groups, those kind of things. It was a good 2 years while we were well, we did some specific some specific bike rides. We did an energy tour where we ride our bikes to look at a house that used solar energy, and then to another that used wind energy and different things like that. So that was a lot of fun. Oh, other things I did, I wrote a book of bike rides with Virginia Church, who I think is here, which was a labor of love. It was a lot of work and greatly rewarding. Did not make either of us rich, but that's the world of bicycling.
I remember the little red.
The little red book, yeah, everybody had it. So out of print, roads changed, as you know. So, but there was a host of things we did for the bicycling community, and we did it because it was needed and it was fun. I wouldn't say that we had a grand overall plan for setting up Portland to become the platinum city for bicycling, but did things that were fun and were needed. So the other thing I want to talk about is the Salmon Street bike route. I know, you never heard of the Salmon Street bike route, that's okay, it doesn't matter. So it was about 1980 when, maybe we were sitting around saying, how do you get downtown from Southeast Portland? How do you go? Because Faulkner's too busy, Belmont, Morrison's too much traffic. And so somebody said, well, I use Salmon Street, it's a residential street, just quiet, no cars. And then we thought, well, gee, if it was a through street, because you have to slow down at every intersection is unmarked. Why doesn't the city put stop signs along all those cross streets so that Salmon's a through street? Great. So a couple of us went to the city of Portland and we talked to the bike coordinator, and there was a bike coordinator, that's good. And we proposed this idea. Here's a great idea. All the city has to do is put in stop signs, right way for bike transportation. And the response we get was something like, oh, I see. Well, city rules, to put up a stop sign, you have to get approval of 60% of the owners within the area to get each stop. So that's each corner. Now, in hindsight, that probably meant, so forget it. There's no way you're going to get the public to agree. But we didn't know that. So, we had a meeting and we divided up Salmon Street. Each one took 70 blocks, we had a petition, knocked on doors, and got 60% of the signatures. Went to City Hall. We went to the bike coordinator and said, okay, we did it. And then things changed. We were taken seriously. So the traffic engineers tweaked some things, added traffic calming devices. And in another year and a half, we can't be too impatient. Salmon Street became a good bike. It became a bike route. Now, I mentioned this, that you never heard of it, and I actually saw bikes on it yesterday, so that's not bad. But I think it was significant for 2 reasons. One, it was the first visibility in the road structure that said, welcome cyclists. This is for cyclists. We did something for cyclists. And the other reason is that it was we the people there. We cyclists said, this is what's needed, and it was done. So it was, the people coming forward with something. And by the way, the Salmon Street bike ride, that was the start of, then the city would say, what about Northeast? Should we look at a corridor in Northeast? So a task force was formed, figuring out where another bike bike-friendly street should go. So those are two things I wanted to talk about. I'll pass it on to the next person.
One question.
Oh, okay.
When does they initiate the Hawthorne Bridge off-ramp?
I can't answer that. How about other old timers? I'm sort of thinking, I never remember having to walk my bike off a curb on the Hawthorne Bridge. Did anybody? I don't know. The Hawthorne Bridge. Isn't it, you don't know how great it is now. You don't know how great it is now. It was, well, where is it? You shared it with pedestrians, always bring that, someone dangling their umbrella's going to go right through your spokes. You know, the fact that Division Street, because I live near Division Street, the fact that car parking was taken off to make room for bike lanes is incredible. I mean, I can't remember how many times we would propose that, and it was just the most ridiculous thing to think of. Inconvenience a motorist for a bicyclist wouldn't happen. So it's delightful to see how much that's happened since then. Okay, sure.
So to introduce myself, I'm going to ask a question. How many of you recognize me as the guy on the orange bike? Yeah, so back in I'll pick up where Ed left off. Back in the mid-'80s, when I was riding my orange bike around everywhere, things were starting to heat up a little bit in the bike world. I started working in shops in 1987. And I think there was some bike infrastructure at that time, but I was commuting from Beaverton to my job in Northeast Portland over the West Hills at that time. So evidently I was fairly visible. And to follow that question, let me ask, how many of you know what bike I ride today? I mean, some of you do because you know me, but those of you who don't know me don't pay attention to me at all. Why is that? So that's, to me, the big change here, is that I used to be the guy, because they didn't assume a woman would be riding like that all over not just the city, but the metro area on this orange bike doing stuff. So that's really changed. There was a day when I started working in shops where I'd be out on a ride, and I'd see another cyclist, and it was really exciting because A, I either knew who that cyclist was, or B, I was going to go introduce myself and make a new friend because we were such kindred spirits, only because we were both out riding our bikes. So there was those days, and I see a nod here. It was a really interesting time when several years ago, I looked back and I realized, like, I'm really actually more surprised now when I do see someone I know. There's so many bikes out there. That's one of the big things that have changed. I think the other thing that I've seen that's changed, it isn't just what the city's done. The city's done amazing things. So, you know, when we come from a time when we felt like we were such a small community that you had to know everyone to, like, you ignore people stopped next to you at an intersection. You've come that far. That's a big deal. And there's a whole host of people that were involved in doing that. We had advocates, we had the city, we had citizens, and then there was me. I didn't do what I did on purpose. I did what I did because I was passionate about bikes. I didn't go out and ride my bike everywhere with the intention of making a statement about riding your bike everywhere. I did it because that's just what I had to do, and I still have to do it, and I'm grateful every day for the changes that make it easier to do that. So there was a different time and a different context. So, you know, I basically came from the passionate shop employee. I started working in the bike industry because I hated my other job. I started right out of college working in the finance industry, and I would go home every day and get on my bike and start riding. And then occasionally I'd meet someone new, but most of the time I was by myself. And then I got recruited into a shop and started working with people and realized, wow, this is pretty cool. I get to do something I'm passionate about. And the other thing is I'm sort of like really hard for me just to keep looking back. I look at the present and I look at the future, but in the context of that, it gets really exciting for me because I get to keep doing that. If you know who I am today, I've gone from the sort of early female shop manager and employee and bike fitter. I mean, all these things I was doing in Portland when there were very few women at all doing it. And it was an honor to be doing it, but I wasn't doing it with making a statement. And now I'm just grateful that I've been able to do that through leadership. But if you know who I am today, I'm still doing that. And part of the reason I can do that, part of the reason my business selling cargo bikes and only cargo bikes is so successful is because of all the work that people did to get us to the point where, well, the city says I should ride my bike or take the bus, but then how do I get the kids to school? So here I am again in a position where everyone's sort of helping me do what I enjoy. And I'm sort of an accidental advocate, I guess I would say, because I do love sharing what I do, and I'm intentionally staying in the bike industry because I enjoy sharing and seeing people grow and with their bikes and enjoy their bikes. But I feel like I'm in really incredible company here with folks who have actually done it intentionally. But that's kind of what I'm trying to say. So
So my name's Mia Birk, and I arrived in Portland in 1993. Prior to that, I was, thank you for the memory lane there. Hey Jeff, how many people bike on the Salmon Street bike? What's the
Today?
numbers? Yeah, what's the
Today,
number?
I don't know, I'm gonna guess about 600, 700 a
A
day.
day. So, yeah, it's great job. Like, yeah.
What did you do after that?
Right, so, okay, right, good one. So I arrived here, and I came here specifically with the intention of making Portland a platinum city. Like, I had this vision. I had been working in Washington, D.C. for some nonprofit groups, working on energy efficiency in the transportation sector. I had studied transportation all around the world, and I was very fortunate. At that moment, there were 4 things happening in Portland simultaneously. One was national, and that was the passage of the first federal transportation bill that authorized and required spending on bicycling and walking. It was called ICE-T, the Intermodal Surface Transportation Efficiency Act. And so for the first time, the spigot of money basically was flowing, and that makes that's huge. But then in Portland specifically, there were 3 things that were happening. One is that the BTA had recently been formed, like around what year, Rex? By Rex Burkholder and a number of others. 1990. So it just before it was kind of just getting its feet wet and starting to exert some real influence. They had a really successful project to get TriMet to experiment with putting racks on the buses. And they had pressured the county to keep the Hawthorne Bridge open for bikes during an initial closure of the Hawthorne Bridge. So there were some successes with the BTA. Earl Blumenauer, so the second thing in Portland was Earl Blumenauer was Commissioner of Transportation, and he was very passionate about a number of things, but he had been to Europe and he had seen what Copenhagen and Amsterdam had done and had really had a vision that Portland could do a lot of those things as well. And the third thing was the industry, that mountain bikes had come in. And so we had gone from having like skinny tired bikes and old Schwinn's, which was my first bike, an old Schwinn, to having these hybrids and mountain bikes. And you could see that changing the landscape as a big part of what was going on here. So those 3 things were happening, so the money and the people and the politics and the equipment, really, basically. So that's kind of what was happening at that moment. And I arrived in 1983 with, to work with Jeff Smith over there, who was in the bike program, and took over the job maybe from the bike coordinator that you had been referencing. There had been a bike coordinator in Portland since about 1978 or something. Jan Schaefer.
And, I'm trying to remember who was there before.
Jan Schaefer and...
Jan was the first.
The first,
Yeah.
yeah. And then after that was
Chris.
Chris. And I feel like there was one person in the middle there somewhere that had it for briefly or something.
Joe Walsh.
Oh, Joe Walsh, that's right.
And one of the Banana Republic, sheriff on the first one.
So what was Portland like in 1993? Well, it was pieces. There was the Salmon Street Bikeway, and there was a Southeast 26, a skinny little bike lane on 26 over by Cleveland High School. There were, ODOT had started calling shoulders on highway. I mean, there were shoulders on highways. They started calling them bike lanes, and so now we had bike lanes. And there was Leif Erikson Drive, which was recently closed in the 70s to cars, or 60s or 70s, and so now we have a bike path. And that added a lot of mileage, although it's not really functional from a transportation standpoint. It added a lot of mileage. Well, it's beautiful. I mean, I used to.
There's a recent article that they're banning using bikes up in that park.
That's another bike lane.
Okay.
Yeah.
But what you also had at that time was what has been discussed a lot recently is bike-lash. There was a lot of stuff that Jeff and Chris and others were trying to get done in the 80s, and they had, in Rex, and they had a lot of bike-lash. And one of them which was fighting against those things, and one of them had just happened when I arrived, was Northeast Knott. There had been a proposal to put bike lanes on Northeast Knott. Some of you know it's a lovely street, and there's fairly decent amount of room, and people don't use the parking that much, and so there was a proposal to trade off one side of parking for 2 bike lanes, and it just did not go well, right? Did not go well, and there was a lot of negative media, and ultimately City Council actually voted it down. I think it's maybe the only time in history that City Council in Portland has voted against a bike lane project. I could be wrong. So I was bike coordinator from 1993 to 1999, and during that period, at the beginning when I first got here, the bridges were all awful. They were consistently awful. They either had, you couldn't get on and off. Maybe they had sidewalks, but you couldn't actually get onto them or off of them in any way that didn't involve crossing a lot of ramps and weaving through traffic, and there weren't bike lanes on the approaches. None of them had bike lanes on the approaches. The Broadway Bridge maybe had the decent sidewalks, but they were slippery, so they were all had problems. There was just nothing. That's the best I can say about that. There was very little bike parking. Jeff had been putting in a few bike racks a year that the city was funding for businesses that requested them, the staple racks. But there wasn't a bike parking code that required businesses to put in bike parking whenever they built a building or renovated a building. The code we had was really weak, and it didn't really apply to renovations, and we got into a huge battle that went on for years to update that bike parking code, and now it's like a no-brainer, right? Does anybody fight putting in bike parking? It's just part of what businesses and architects and buildings do. And if, many of them, of course, asked to trade off car parking now for the corrals, but that was not the case. And there was a bike commute day, and then Earl started the Bike in the Rain day, so there were a few kind of fun events, but there certainly weren't the, 2,000 or 3,000 events that go on now. We didn't have Jonathan kind of uniting us all through the Bike Portland. It was just the beginnings, and that's the way it was back there. So, what we did for the beginning and starting in 1983 is we really said, let's go out and talk to the public, and let's have a community conversation about bicycling as a serious form of transportation. I remember going to about 60 different groups in a matter of a year or so, Lions clubs and Rotaries and PTAs and business groups, and there were some bicycling groups, and there were just whoever would listen to me and Jeff and whoever talk about, hey, bicycling is a good thing, and the city thinks it's a good thing, and let's talk about what's in the toolkit. We can do bike lanes, and we can do greenway type of things on local streets, and we can do more paths, and we can do bike parking. We can do it. Yes, we can do it. And so this really positive thing, and I would bike to all the meetings, loaded up with slide projectors, trays, and the slides that you have to put upside down and backwards. Remember these? Some of you remember this, I know you do. And then they would get jammed, and you'd sit there trying to, and then the projector bulb would go out, and it was always very entertaining back in the day before PowerPoint projectors. Then I would show up, I was always dressed deliberately very nicely, and was always often, of course, the only one who biked to the meeting, and looking desperately for a pole to lock up to, and was often just so much concern. Did you bike here? Can we give you a ride home? Are you sure? Are you sure it's really dark out? I know it's not a good idea. We'll take you home. And just the amount of, nowadays I just can't imagine if you brought your helmet into a meeting, anybody batting an eye, right? And then it was like, you biked here, really? Wow, you're really a good person. You're doing good for the world. Or the flip was always which I know we all still get, is the kind of rant about, well, bicyclists don't obey the law, and so that's where it was back then. And as you guys know, that was kind of the era where a lot of exciting things began. A lot of things came together. We adopted a new bicycle master plan in 1996 that was updating like the 70-something bicycle master plan, although it took a lot of the pieces that Andy and others had already thought out, like the Salmon Street Bikeway and other places. Jeff had been working on a number of neighborhood bike plans back there. There was like a Southeast Bikeways plan and a North Portland Bike Plan, and so we kind of united all those together, and that was kind of the beginning of what I think has led Portland to become one of the country's best cities.
Well,
I think by way of introduction, I'll give you some inflection points in my personal biking history, and that might lead us to some questions you might have later. So I moved here in 1993 to go to college. Didn't start biking right away because I'm very, very risk averse and not at all sporty, so I thought that was, not for me. And it wasn't until I went on an overseas program to Germany, and still it took me a long time, but started biking there, came back, realized it was the superior way to get from Selwood to Lewis and Clark College. That I finally got super brave and bought a bike and started biking. That was probably about 98, I'm thinking. Did that for a couple of years. After college, I biked across the country on my MB5, not the most appropriate bike for cross-country ride. And, in terms of like why that matters, in my biking history, it's because I came back mad. That was you really understand that you're a second, if not third class citizen if you spend, 3 months biking across the country. So I was looking for like, oh, what do I do? And, I was working in the tech industry, but at that time I started volunteering with the BTA, and eventually in 2001 joined the staff of the BTA. Some of you will know, like that's the Karen Frost, Catherine Charlo, Rita Johnson, Scott Bricker era. Worked there for 5 years. In 2006, I joined Mia at Alta and have been working there since. So, I was thinking like, well, what stories do I want to tell you that might be of interest and enlightening to you? And so I think I'll actually, instead of trying to come at it from the professional perspective, I think I want to tell you what it was just like to start biking. Remembering that, I was pretty young, I was inexperienced with bicycling, so I had a newbie's, my memories are filtered through who I was at the time, but I think also that same person who I am, if I started biking today, would have a really different experience. So the city, I think you need to understand, if you moved here recently, was not cool at all. There was nothing cool about it. It was just a profoundly second-tier, unremarkable Western city. It was probably as well known as Portland, Maine. And
By the way, it's looking like Boston because they flipped the coin.
Yeah. So there was no buzz in any aspect, bikes or otherwise. It was just this kind of quiet city. The Pearl District literally didn't exist. It was like auto shops and warehouses and totally dead at night, if even. The bleeding edge of the cool kids finding the studios there, but it was dead at night. The Weinhard's brewery was still stinking up the city. I hate that smell. And
I remember Milwaukee when I came in '94. I thought it was wholesome.
Yeah, it felt good, right? Restaurant-wise, it was like Zaffiro's and what? Yeah, Highlander, yeah. I mean, New York Times was not writing about this.
Yeah.
So I think, and so I think none of us who lived here, really thought of like there being any, there was no kind of, I don't want to say culture wars, but there was no sort of like cachet going on. And that applies to bicycling as well. So when you started bicycling in whenever it was, 97, 98, you're so marginal, it just like, you didn't really exist, you didn't really, like no one really saw you, you felt like this tiny grain of sand, trying to find your way. I'm not using the right metaphor, but I mean, I just really remember feeling like small and insignificant and trying to figure everything out on your own. So I want to talk about both the physical infrastructure and the social infrastructure at the time. The physical infrastructure we probably covered well enough. It was very, very, very fragmented. I would never, first of all, if you can even figure out how to get your hands on bike now, which wasn't easy, there was not really the internet.
Yeah, diesel was in 1976.
It took a long time to figure out what you needed to know, and it wasn't easy to sort of like turn around and stumble across a person or a program or a brochure or a map or a web page that could make it easy for you. And then even once you found out, it was sort of this like dowsing experiment where, I guess this is where I'm supposed to bike. Let's go. Okay, great, now I know. But what infrastructure was there was highly, highly fragmented, didn't get you from everywhere. It would like be part of your trip you might get to do on a slightly more pleasant street, but you wouldn't expect door-to-door coverage. And I think the bar was pretty low quality-wise. You know, a lot of those routes originally were mostly just green signs. Maybe a couple turn stop signs, but honestly, mostly just some signs. And bike lanes, conventional bike lanes. And we were happy. So, I mean, there was no additional separation. There were some shared use paths, but not as many as you think of today. There was no Esplanade, you know, there was no connection from OMSI to the Selwood, to the Springwater corridor. You know, what was there was not that great. And I feel like it did when I started in 98.
Maybe by 98.
I really think it is. Yeah. And then the social infrastructure also was just like largely non-existent. So I called up Eric Tonkin, whom I literally met on my first day as a bicyclist in Portland, like bought bike off Craigslist, walked to neighborhood shops, said, deer in the headlights, what do I do now? So I was trying to get him to help me remember what it was like then. And so I got a sense from him that the racing social infrastructure was just starting to kind of come together. There was a cyclocross scene, but it wasn't that big. He says there was, but barely, yeah.
I mean, I would say 15 women
Well, yeah.
at a cyclocross event, so we would get all clumped in with the masters and 1-2 men. So to go to a race now and see like a whole separate women's category is really remarkable.
Yeah.
Same with mountain bike racing. There was races that I did that I was one of 4 women that weren't in the pros.
Right, right.
So it's very different.
But certainly for like people who weren't racers, I mean, if there were people to meet I just felt really lonely, you know, and like everything, you know, you just have to make up everything as you go along, and I made a lot of weird mistakes, but, and also I remember on Terwilliger, like seeing another bicyclist come in, like waving furiously and smiling and just being like, oh, we must be kindred spirits, like, our bikes. So I think there was a lot of that. And then, you know, I was also thinking along with this social infrastructure, I remember that it used to be this tremendous dating cachet to be a woman on a bike. I was like a unicorn, man. I never got to take advantage of it, but you know, I just remember all these like male volunteers coming into the BTA and just being like, where do we meet more people like you?
Just up to the back wheel and do a forward flip.
Yeah. And then, you know, this is jumping forward a little bit, but it is funny to me to remember the day that this guy, Jonathan Moss, called me up at the BTA and said, hey, can I take you out to coffee? Because I've got this idea for a blog. So I think I should do it, because everyone's telling me that I shouldn't quit my day job, and that's a totally dumb idea, and you can never make it. And I remember being like, yeah, I think that would be pretty cool. I think we should do that. And I remember his wife really being like, what are you even talking about? So that was a big moment when, you know, there was a place for everyone to kind of come together virtually, and that corresponded also with, you know, the cities starting to have more programs providing outreach and support and education, and people just being able to come together and meet each other and get their questions answered and feel not so lonely. So I think I'll stop talking with that. That's great.
What things haven't you heard about yet? What questions do you have? Sir?
I'd like to hear a little bit more about the infrastructure and how it became part of the master plan and where Alta Planning sits in on that, how that got started, like where the initial impetus was for Alta and what the principal mission was maybe back then.
Well, when I was bike coordinator 1983 to 1999, I worked with Jeff, and then Roger Geller came in, and we had Barb Plummer and Linda Gannon involved for a little while, and we crafted a bicycle master plan at that time that pulled together the vision for all the infrastructure, where the initial bike lanes, and at that time, you know, the idea of protected bike lanes or cycle tracks wasn't really on the landscape. I mean, it was kind of conceptually, but it was just a fight to just get a basic bike lane was a huge fight, so there was not a lot of, energy around fighting the next battle when we were just fighting the battles right there. And then there was a lot of energy that went into the bridge upgrades, a lot of money and a lot of energy. And the bridge upgrades, which is the bridges are very complicated. They're owned by the county and the Union Pacific Railway and ODOT, and also the city has jurisdiction over some of the ramps, but not others. And so it's a really complicated landscape, and so it was many jurisdictions coming together over many years as is continuing. to go on today, right, Marty?
And those you keep looking at me. We'll figure it out, we'll figure it out.
You'll never figure it out. It's just the reality of every bridge project I've ever worked on across the country. Bridges are really, really complicated places. So it's actually a great testament to Portland how much progress has happened on the bridges. And then the separated path network was really the jurisdiction of Metro and the Parks Bureau. And so having everybody come together to go, okay, we got ODOT, we got the county, we got TriMet, we got Parks Bureau, we got Metro, we got PBOT, like they all have different pieces, and this is really common in lots of cities, but that you don't have unity. You have fragmented bureaucracies, and so a big part of what we did in those early years was try to create that big tent of we're all working together, and so working very closely with the leadership of all those different entities to try to create that more cohesive vision. I think that's why Portland, and to a large extent, has been really successful because we are good at talking to each other. You know, where there was a lot of public outreach and a lot of work with the business and neighborhood associations and the school district and others, and although there's not been perfection, as you guys know, there was a lot of progress made because of those initial efforts. So yeah, that was 1993 to 1999. I left the city in 1999. I didn't leave the city of Portland, but I left the bureaucracy of the city of Portland. At the time that, that things kind of were going in like a bit of a wave, like Earl Blumenauer had gone to Congress in 1996, and we have a commissioner style of government here, so the commissioner is in charge of the bureau, right? So when Earl was in charge of the bureau, this was a very high priority for him. When he left, then Charlie Hales was in charge of the bureau, and Charlie was very supportive of bicycle transportation, but it wasn't like his top priority. He was more into the streetcar and creating the South Waterfront District and some of the things that were high priority for him. Yeah, I mean, he had some other really important priorities, although he was very supportive of bicycle transportation. But there were other things that were happening. We had a pedestrian program, we had a traffic calming program, so there were some shifts that happened with all of those when Jim Francisconi took over the bureau. Then there became significant, it was definitely a different era in terms of